My name is Torsten Bell, I'm the Director of the Resolution Foundation. For those of you that are new to us, we are an economic research think tank focused on the living standards of families on low middle incomes. And we're here today to talk about the living wage, how it's calculated, what it's for, how it's going, what does the future hold. And before we get into kind of the meat of some of that, it's just worth reflecting on what is, in many ways, as we watch Donald Trump stomping around the United States, a pretty grim time for some bits of politics. The living wage campaign is a kind of bright spot of success in the dark, rainy, drizzly land that we sometimes inhabit. We'll talk a bit about some of the kind of volume of employers that are signed up and all that, which is great, and what that means in terms of human beings actually getting a pay rise. But more importantly, it's also a campaign that is rooted in kind of the issue of our time. There's lots of issues out there about that are good things to campaign on, but the rise of working poverty as the central defining problem of our economy and our time is what the living wage speaks to. So it's the right issue, it's a zeitgeist issue. As the TUC's research out this morning highlights, Britain's pay squeeze is a huge defining feature of what's been going on over the last few years. And secondly, it's a successful campaign in an old-fashioned sense that it turns out to be quite good at campaigning. I don't know if anyone has been to some of the kind of pre-election events that the London Citizens and Assets UK have put on and things, but you do basically see good old-fashioned campaigning using things like emotion and alongside economic argument, which is rare in the world. So that's good things. Now, I should start with a small confession before we get into some of the substances, which is that I'm a twin, an identical twin brother. Now, the good news is he lives in Paris most of the time, so you're not going to have a socially awkward moment bumping into him down the street. But that brings with it challenges, and those challenges are that sometimes someone with a similar name to you is turning up at things and taking credit for things you've done. And he looks quite similar too, and people that don't know us very well are sometimes like, well, you know, which one's which one did that thing, or that. Sometimes you get blamed for the bad thing, that's quite irritating. But in the end, you kind of put up with it because you're kind of born together, it's no one's fault, no one's responsible for it, so you're like, okay, I'm going to put up with this guy, I'm probably stuck with him for my life, fine, fair enough. Right, now, look, where am I going with this? Along came last July a thing called the National Living Wage, which was a little bit like the kind of twin of the living wage, except that someone did it as opposed to it appearing at the birth of the living wage. And we are now living with the fact that at some parties like this, for the living wage, people are asking, what is this national living wage? Is it related? Is it a cousin? What is it? A twin? And are they different to each other? So one of the things we'll reflect on today is how does the arrival of the national living wage affect how people think and argue and calculate the living wage itself. Now, to help us do that, we've got Catherine Chapman, who is the Director of the Living Wage Foundation. We have Conor Darcy, who's a policy analyst here at the Resolution Foundation. And we have Stuart White, who is, make sure I get this right, Property and Facilities Director at Aviva. Very good. So we're going to touch on a bit of some of the work we've done, what is going on with the living wage campaign itself, and then what the firms think about that, what's going on with the real world of paying people. So that's our plan today, and then we'll get as many of your questions in as we can. Now, Catherine, I think you're going to kick us off.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here. First, I'd just like to say thank you to the Resolution Foundation for all their work on this report, which we are launching and discussing today, which is looking at the methodology of the living wage. I'm just going to sort of kick us off by talking a little bit about the background to the campaign, where we are right now, and why we commissioned this review, and kind of next steps in terms of how we might implement it, and the role of the Living Wage Commission, which some of you may know about. So just starting with the campaign, as sort of many of you might know, the living wage started out in East London about 15 years ago now. Families in East London were finding that despite working 2 or 3 minimum wage jobs, they just weren't able to make ends meet, and they weren't able to spend any time with their families or participate in civic life. So a group of coalition of unions, community organisations, faith groups came together to campaign for the creation of a living wage. And really the goal was to create an attainable, voluntary benchmark that reflected the true cost of living in London, that would enable these families to make ends meet and have a dignified quality of life. So in 2005, the GLA calculated the first London living wage, and there was some kind of early wins with the campaign, particularly focusing on cleaners, caterers, security staff, and kind of financial services. and there were some early wins there with HSBC and KPMG, who have been a key champion of the cause. And then as the campaign kind of evolved and grew momentum, in around 2010, employers and unions and campaigners came together with the Centre for Research and Social Policy at Loughborough University to create a UK living wage rate. And in 2011, the first UK living wage rate was launched, and the Living Wage Foundation was created. And we are the organisation that accredit employers who pay the living wage with the employer mark, and we kind of promote the campaign. So we've actually been going for 5 years now. And we're in a very different place now than we were 5 years ago. Just to sort of give you a sense of growth, really, if you like. As you can see from the graph, it's just grown really rapidly since the beginnings of 2011. We're now on well over 2,600 accredited employers, and we've got a third of the FTSE 100 signed up. And we've had some major breakthroughs in kind of a broad base of sectors, most recently this year in the retail sector with the sign-up of IKEA and Oliver Bonas, among others, which means that we now have a lot of businesses with very large numbers of low-paid workers in our network who are signed up to this voluntary rate. And of course, as Torsten has alluded to, there was of course a landmark moment in July last year where the Chancellor announced the national living wage, which is of course, it was a real win for the campaign. It used the energy of the campaign, it was a pay rise for millions of workers, but it is a completely separate calculation. It's a legal minimum wage for over 25s. But what's quite interesting, if you look on the graph, is actually July 2015 when it was announced, and then April when it was introduced. We're still seeing a growth trajectory. So if anything, we saw a spike in accreditations when it was announced. So that's certainly the kind of sort of ambitions for the future to continue on that trajectory. So why then did we commission this review? And there are sort of two real drivers for it that came out of a working group that the Living Wage set up a couple of years ago, which had accredited employers, unions, and took advice from the calculating bodies, so the GLA and the Centre for Research and Social Policy. And there were two main areas that we felt that were raised as kind of concerns. The first one was around aligning the methodology. Because of the history of the campaign, the London rate and the UK rate share many common principles, but they are calculated in a slightly different way. But as the campaign has now grown and we've got an increased number of national living wage employers, it became more important to make sure that those methodologies are aligned. And secondly, it was thinking about the impact of forthcoming policy changes, so in particular universal credit. Both of the rates take into account tax credits in recognition of the balance of responsibility between employers and the state for kind of working families. And it was kind of pointed out quite early on that the rollback and universal credit and the introduction of the 5 years potentially would have a quite big and volatile impact on the rate. So there would need to be a process involved to manage that transition. And of course, it was just an opportunity after 5 years to review the kind of, ensure it was using the best available data and all those kind of evidence sources to make sure that it really was using the best evidence about what constitutes a decent standard of living. So, this working group recommended the establishment of an independent body to, first of all, do a review of the methodologies to help align the rate, and secondly, to provide a kind of ongoing oversight function of the calculation. And so in January this year, we launched the Living Wage Commission, and that's a group of really senior figures from civil society, accredited employers, union movement, and as you can see, it's up. The commission's listed up here. It's chaired by Gavin Kelly, and you can see there's Fiona Kendrick, chairman of Nestlé, also Francis O'Grady from the TUC. And the Resolution Foundation were commissioned to undertake this review of the method, and that's what we're kind of launching today. So in terms of next steps, the report has been launched, and with thanks to the Resolution Foundation for that, based on their stakeholder interviews and looking at all the data and evidence. The next steps are for the Living Wage Commission to consider that review, working closely with the GLA and the Mayor of London, and they will report their findings in September of this year, in time for the announcement of the new living wage rates, which are in Living Wage Week, which is the first week of November. So before we get on to kind of the meat of the method, I just wanted to kind of end on one final note. This is a quote from an early living wage campaigner, Father John Ryan, from America in 1906, which shows the kind of length of time that this concept of living wage has been around, but also the importance and challenges around calculating what a living wage is. And I suppose the point to make is there is no perfect solution to what a living wage is. It will necessarily require certain judgments about the balance between employer and state, between what constitutes a decent quality of living. But I think what this review will do and what the Living Wage Commission will do, well, it will help shore up that process. I mean, Torsten alluded to the success of their campaign, and obviously one of the real reasons of its success is because it has been aligned, it has been based on this method. And so this commission and this review will really help enhance that and help us, we hope, continue on over the next 5 or 15 years with the campaign and to continue making inroads in those low-paying sectors where we still know there are millions of workers working in low pay. So I'll stop there and allow the other speakers to carry on.
Great, thank you very much. Connor's now going to take us through the summary of the meat of the review that we're publishing today and the methodology.
Yes, so as Catherine mentioned, it's all on our website, so if you want to get into a bit more detail on this, feel free to have a look there. And Catherine's already given you a sense of what our mission or our aims were in this, to set out a sustainable basis for the two rates in the future and crucially align the two methodologies while still keeping a separate London rate to recognise the higher costs that people in the capital face. So the review process has been, it's kind of some of this typical RF stuff of looking around the data. And apologies in advance, I've only got one slide in this, one chart in this presentation. So I know normal RF presentations are some wall-to-wall charts, but hopefully you can make do with just one. But we did some of that, but we also talked to a lot of stakeholders as part of this process. We talked to people who've been involved in the campaign for a long time. We spoke to accredited employers, we spoke to non-accredited employers to get a sense of what they thought was important and the decisions they were making. And we also spoke to academics who had been involved in work around this issue. So we kind of got as broad a sense of what was going on, what people thought was really crucial as possible. And we're reporting back to the Living Wage Commission, as Catherine suggested. So we've already touched on it, but it is really worth hammering home the differences between the different rates. So as you can see, the first thing that's obviously striking here is that the UK living wage and the London living wage are much higher than the national living wage. And this is because they are actually based on what people need to get by. The national living wage, the higher minimum wage, is based on kind of trajectory to get to 60% of what the typical person earns, so there's no real link to what anyone needs to have a decent standard of living, whereas the UK and the London rates do take that approach and focus on it. So I think, national living wage is obviously a really positive move, and it's going to boost pay for lots and lots of workers. But I think it is, even more important to kind of keep the focus on the living wage campaign and the good it does to provide that decent standard of living to workers. And as Catherine showed, it's been a massive success. So hopefully the work we've done will help that to continue. So, but as Catherine said, there is no, there's no perfect calculation for this. There's not a right formula that we can come up with that no one will argue with. There's some principles that I think are kind of underlined in the quote that Catherine used there. Basically it should allow for an acceptable standard of living for people who are earning it. Should be driven by changes in the cost of living. So it should reflect how society is evolving, how prices are evolving. Should be transparent. So the two current methods, there's good detailed write-ups of how that method's done. Obviously that should be continued, but it also should be simple, because the day-to-day work of the campaign is talking to employers, talking to employees, explaining to them what this calculation is for, what it's trying to provide. So we can come up with a really, really complex version of this, but if you can't explain it to anyone, then it's not very much use. So the approach that we took then was to first look at the two existing methods, because obviously they've done quite a good job of this so far. And there's some definite similarities, but there's some key differences. And there's always going to be compromises in these decisions. So kind of where the compromises fall, where where these judgments have been made, varies between the two rates. So if you look at the UK one first, so again, as Catherine mentioned, it's done by CRSP at Loughborough University, led by Don Hirsch. So it starts off with this minimum income standards research, which is funded by JRF. And what they do is they get groups of typical people and ask them, what do you need to meet this kind of minimal acceptable standard of living? So it's not just to have warmth and shelter. It's also about being able to participate in society, which is kind of a broader definition. So they discuss this for different types of families, so families with kids, what do you need, different ages of kids, that sort of question. They take these different kind of baskets of goods and services that families need and price them up at Tesco or Matalan or wherever they're coming from, and add in costs for housing and childcare from national data sets. And then a weighted average is taken to kind of represent the share of the population. So there's a lot more singles and couples without kids than there are single parents with 2 or 3 children. So that's kind of the appropriate weights are taken into account, and then a single hourly figure gets produced, and that's the living wage. I've obviously glossed over lots of bits, but that's the kind of the general sense of it. So it is based on that core basket of goods, and it is updated every year. So there's a rolling process where these groups, these focus groups, are updating the research all the time. So it's meant to be that if things do change in society, if people were tightening their belts during recession and felt that some things that were acceptable in the past aren't really required, or vice versa, as living standards improve generally, things get added in that weren't there, as well as capturing change, moving from different kinds of technology that are needed, that sort of thing. So that's the UK one. London takes a similar approach in one half of its calculation. So there's this similar basket. They call it the low cost but acceptable one. But the big difference here is that it was based on a bit of research done in the late 90s, early 2000s. And it's a similar basket of goods. It's a bit more expert driven. It's a bit more has a bit more kind of influence from data sets and from standards set out by the Department of Health, for instance. But the kind of the core idea is there, and there's a lot of overlap between the two baskets. But the big difference is that isn't regularly updated. It's just that fixed basket of goods that was set in place in that period, about 15 years ago. So the price of those items gets updated. So things get put into, here's your budget for food, here's your budget for fuel, other things like that. So a lot of this doesn't shift, but some of those social participation elements do tend to move a bit. But they are updated every year by inflation, so the price does rise for each of these different components, but the actual things that are in the basket don't ever change. So that's one half of it, quite similar to the UK, but not updating all the time. The other half then is this link to the poverty line, basically. So this, the relative poverty line, which is often used, is 60% of median income for different family types, so taking effect of the number of children in the families. So this is intended to provide kind of a link to how families are doing overall, and where the poverty line is. So there's an argument to be made that this is a lot of this is about taking people above the poverty line, helping people out of poverty. But I think one of the issues is that if you're it's not a pure cost of living measure. It's not just focused on how much you need to get by and what's in that basket. So it adds in that a little bit. Then the London wage also adds on 15% to account for rainy day costs, so if your washing machine breaks down, and that's how you end up with the London living wage. And just to add, all of this is after in-work support from governments is assumed, so that's, there's tax credits cuts, then that does have an impact on the rate that you'll need as well. So, to the recommendations, so there's lots of these in the full report, so have a read that if you're interested. I'm just going to kind of go through some of the key ones, but I think it is important to set out that there's lots of things in the current methods that we're going to maintain because they're really sensible and they appeal to us and make sense. I think it had really wide support in the consultations that we did. So I think the first one, again, really coming out quite strongly from the stakeholders, was having that regularly updated basket of goods that is informed by just typical people. Seemed a really sensible approach that people really liked. And looking at kind of the options out there, the minimum income research is really valuable, and it does a pretty good job of trying to meet that standard. It's not perfect. It's set up in its own rights. It's trying to fulfill a different job. It's not just designed to provide a living wage. So there are some potential improvements. So I think one thing that really came out quite strongly, especially talking to stakeholders from Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, was having more of a voice from people in the rest of the UK. So at the moment it's mostly focused around the East Midlands and England. So having a broader sense of what people expect in the rest of the UK to make sure that this is truly a UK living wage, I think is really important. And then regularly updating, as I said, to reflect how society changes. So then the next one is the greater mix of family types. So at the moment, there's a different variety of households, as I said, different numbers of kids. In the London one, there's just every family with kids is assumed to have 2 children who are both aged 4 and 10, which isn't actually the case in the real world. And in the UK, all families with 1 child, for instance, they're assumed to have a baby. So just some improvements on that suggest that we have a better representative mix of the kinds of ages of children and the number of children in families as well. So kind of slightly some larger ones as per the UK method at the moment. And up-to-date data on population sizes, which sounds like again, this is the weights, so how big are, how many single parents are there, how many families with kids are there to properly weight out the costs. And that sounds like a technical one, but updating that actually does have quite a big effect, which I'll come back to in a second. And then there's this one point where, if you want to be really representative as we are with family types. Another argument could be that should you have just full-time workers in this, the principle that there's an expectation of full-time work gives you that decent standard of living, or as is done in the London one, being a bit more representative, including people who work part-time. And I mean, there's definitely arguments that can be made for either side, but speaking to employers and speaking to campaigners as well, and kind of thinking about those principles of simplicity and meeting that standard of living, I think full-time work kind of makes sense for this. And I think what's really important is, and what the Living Wage Foundation is increasingly involved in this, is recognising that the living wage, this rate is really important, but it's only ever one part of the campaign for better jobs, to make sure that people have enough hours to get by. So I think these two things kind of really go hand in hand. So then, there's lots of data improvements that we can recommend around housing and childcare and travel. So that change in population weights that I mentioned means that now we've got about 7 in 10 families within the calculation who are privately renting. So that obviously, it's reflecting how society has shifted over time, and more people are living in the private sector with higher costs. Continue the assumption of full-time childcare that's in the UK one, with an extra, so 37.5 hours a day, plus an extra hour to cover commuting time. But there's always an issue with the data here, and that does limit some of what we can do, especially in London, where we get some really extreme costs when people are spending up to £30,000 a year on childcare. So we kind of cut off the most extreme ones that present a reasonable average for what families are actually spending on this. And the travel assumptions that we're making are quite similar, but just with extra costs, as Adelaide in London for those older children who are now in the calculation. So the calculation, we think, should offer a really good solid foundation for the campaign going forward, but there's always going to be shocks, as the last month or so has amply shown. So I think some degree of year-to-year stability is really valuable. And at the moment in the UK rate, there's this kind of rule that the living wage will never rise by more than average earnings plus 2% in any one year, to kind of control that, to stop it from massively increasing in any one year. I think that's a sensible principle, but we've recommended linking that to inflation to kind of keep it linked to living costs a bit more strongly, to provide that some sense of stability. But for some of those shocks, while those price rises go up, there are things, like we already mentioned, around the introduction of universal credit, where these are potentially really big shifts. And there's no right answer for how you start to move across, because obviously some people in the country are already receiving universal credit, and over the next few years, more and more people will be moved on to it. So at which point you start to use the new system, or how you phase that in, is a really difficult question. And these are ones that we're going to have to be answered in any case. So we think it's really valuable now that the Living Wage Commission are there to discuss this, think about what the best approach is, what the impact on employees and employers will be, and then make a very transparent decision on the decisions, on why they made that choice. So, summary and next steps. So, Living Wage Commission, we've given them the review. It's their job now to think about what we've done, and talk to the GLA and Mayor of London, and think about what the next best steps are. But we really think this is going to set out a good future for the living wage. And in terms of the impact, because I'm sure the big question is, what does it actually mean for the rate? It really depends on what the Living Wage Commission decide, because some of these changes have bigger impacts than others. But I think in general, what we might see is there's probably going to be an effect on both the rates. We expect there to be a sensible transition period, whatever happens. Again, that's up to the Commission. But I think the effect is likely to be a bit larger in London, because the recommendations that we've made are more kind of similar to the UK rate at the moment, with just that single basket of goods. And there's some factors like bigger family sizes, more private renters, that will probably increase the London rate a bit more. So that's the kind of rough overview. There'll be more from us in the coming months, and obviously we'll see what the Commission makes.
Great, thank you very much, Connor. I mean, just in one simple way of saying what the review is doing, for those of you that aren't going to read 40, 50 pages of it, which I recommend you doing anyway, but some of you may reject that recommendation. The living wage's defining feature is that it's rooted in the cost of living, and this review basically says, how can we do an even better job of making sure that defining feature comes through loud and clear in how we set the rates. That's basically what it does. Now, what about the real world?
Right, so I've brought a bit of brand colour to the presentation, and you'll see, I'm an engineer by background, and also some of the brand colours are a bit interesting, but you'll see that as we go. Thanks for the invitation to talk today. My aim is to give an employer view, to reinforce, I suppose, to those already accredited, perhaps those who are not, to give a bit of encouragement. And I'm going to talk about the real living wage and not its perhaps lesser twin.
Different twin.
Different twin.
Parents of twins get told very early they're not allowed to have food.
Absolutely. But it was the latter born.
Latin.
Yeah. So this is me. What wasn't said, but actually I am chair of the Living Wage Foundation Advisory Council. So I do have an interest in both the employer camp and the living wage camp. And Kath and I work very closely together. We spend the whole day together today. Working with living wage, perhaps not an immediate fit for the property facilities role, perhaps more associated with HR or corporate responsibility in companies. But actually, where the real rubber hits the road tends to be in that area we talked about, cleaning and catering, etc. And it has captured my imagination, so it gets quite a lot of energy, which helps. So Aviva in the UK, we're pretty big across the world, but we're particularly big in our home market of the UK. And I put this up just to show how important it is to us to have that alignment between methodologies, the London and the outer London methodology. We also have an office in Belfast, a small office not shown on the map. So we do cover the whole of the UK. We also have quite a big operation in Ireland, and so the internationalisation of this, I think there's a dimension here which, having a very strong UK methodology is a good message and a good vehicle to take out to the rest of the world as this perhaps becomes more international. In terms of Aviva and the living wage, we joined the journey early on with the London Living Wage. I was actually working for Aviva in London in 2005 and with the introduction of the London Living Wage. You might find that in a company like ours that perhaps you're not going to have that many people on paid living wage, and we'll talk about that in a short time. We are now a principal partner and we take that role very seriously. I've put two things at the bottom of the slide, care more and create legacy. Now that we have some very strong Aviva values which are very strongly held in the group. Care more is about doing the right thing, and creating legacy is about leaving the world a better place than we found it. And Mark Wilson, our CEO, describes that as being a good ancestor. And we see paying the living wage and being the support of the living wage and encouraging its payment in other companies as being absolutely core and aligned to our values. So, implementation. I led this in Aviva a couple of years ago, but actually it's having a champion that is key. And this was championed by our chairman and the board, and therefore it became for Aviva a matter of how we would do it and not if we would do it. I think if you're going to implement living wage, it's absolutely essential that you do that, and that is the case. As I say, it appears very strongly to our wish to do the right thing. But in implementing living wage, you have to look in every corner of the company. And it's very easy, as I said earlier, in a company like Aviva, actually a lot of people were not being paid minimum wage at the time, were being paid more than that. But when you actually go into the detail of the organisation, you find that we have a tied motor repair arm, which you might expect, and the car washers in that motor repair arm were being paid minimum wage. And therefore lifting those people to living wage, it is a warts and all root and branch review, and to implement it properly, that takes quite a lot of effort. Also working with our suppliers, and making sure that it's implemented across suppliers. But I must say that the biggest challenge, when I went to the Aviva board with the whole business case, the biggest series of questions were around impact on the long-term plan. And how did we know that we weren't going to have a huge cost hike, because fundamentally there are some cost issues. How were we not going to have a big cost hike in the future? And actually having the Loughborough process, and as you say, the 2% alignment was helpful. And I think having now a robust, transparent, and hopefully universal methodology for the UK will help not only in businesses already accredited in their longer term planning, but also in the implementation in newly accredited companies. Because it is a natural question, what does happen next? But I will say that if there is the desire to do this, and we are currently in Aviva doing our next 3-year plan, and the assumptions that I have had not questioned at all are the assumptions around the implementation of future living wage increases. In terms of outcomes, which how well that reads on the slide in our brand pink, I was actually amazed at the positivity across Aviva. We have an internal website which people can post anything to, and people tend to be quite brave and not particularly complimentary in a lot of the things that they post about the company. Universally there was a a positive wave across the company, people feeling proud to work for a company that do this. And as I say, is ultimately for a lot of people who are not directly impacted. Also, our CEO and our chairman received quite a lot of personal correspondence complimenting Aviva on taking this stance. Very positive mail into our headquarters. And I must say that not all our mail is positive. It also is obviously a clear link to our corporate responsibility program. And we felt that by being an accredited living wage employer, it helped us to stand on a platform which would encourage others to do the same. If you haven't got your own house in order, it's very hard to do that. It has been hugely positive for our supply base on a number of levels. I mean, it's not just about cleaners and caterers. It's about some of our business process outsourcing activity. We had teams that were paid basically the living wage, but it relied on attendance. And so in order to get the living wage in a week, if you might be paid it for 4 days, but if you didn't work on the 5th day, which is people do not do, then the living wage, the rate was not the same. And we insisted that it could not be based in any way on attendance or performance. It had to be a basic right to earn the living wage. I've spoken to some of the people who've now received a living wage. A cleaner, probably in her 60s, who had the wardship of her grandchild, and she tearfully told me, and she was thanking me for doing this, and I felt very humbled in that respect, but she tearfully told me that she could now, when asked by her grandchild, say yes to going to the pictures or buying a meal, or just simple things that some people might take for granted. And a younger lady who was in a relationship and had been struggling to pay her rent, now found that she could actually save for a holiday or even to buy her own house. And at a very individual personal level, we felt that we had made a real difference. The Aviva as an investor, so Aviva of course is an insurer, but we also are a large asset manager. We manage something like £390 billion worth of assets across the world. And for a long period of time we have been, we believe, an ethical investor, or we rely on ethical investments. But in recent months we have been looking at the living wage as a component of this as a driver of investment decisions. And we believe there is a link between, I suppose, the strength of the company and its ability to pay the living wage, but also in a holistic ethical sense. The way that staff are treated, the way that a company portrays itself in the world, living wage is a major component of that. And we are taking serious investment decisions with that as a factor. And we believe that that's not universal, but it's part of introducing living wage holistically within Aviva and taking that seriously. So living wage for Aviva has been, I think, positive for our people, not just people who benefited from it, but as a feel-good factor for working for a company prepared to do that. It's been good for our suppliers in terms of relationship with our suppliers, and it's been good for their people. It's been good for our brand. I'm not sure that we're exploiting that sufficiently enough, but it's something we're working with Catherine about. So there's not only do we can put the living wage logo out there as a brand statement for us, it actually means other people see that logo and perhaps are interested in what it's about and move down that journey themselves. And we're very happy to be a strong supporter of the Wage Foundation.
Great, thank you very much indeed. Stuart, it's good to have some discussion of people, not just methodologies, exciting as methodologies are for all of us. Right, should we get some of your questions, thoughts, and others? There are some mics going around. The deal is short questions, and then we'll hold these guys to shortish answers. Do you want to take the gentleman in the middle, given that there's 3 here? And then Shami has a gentleman right at the back.
Hi, Keith Appleyard. I run a play group down in Brighton. One of the problems we find with the London rate versus the UK rate is that in many aspects places like Brighton are just as expensive as London. We were the first nursery in the UK to be accredited by the Living Wage Foundation nearly 5 years ago, and there's only about 5 nurseries still accredited 5 years later because it's a low-paid sector, end of story. We actually pay our people not just the living wage, we pay 90% of the London rate. I can't afford any more, but we felt that we had to do more than just the minimum. One of the things that the living wage as such doesn't address is that if you've got people on low pay, and about 2/3 of my staff don't pay national insurance contributions, when they're sick, they can get SSP. So we brought in about 10 years ago an occupational sick scheme to help them, so they get half pay. They also get it from day one of sickness. It doesn't get abused, because I was finding people who weren't back at work after a week because they couldn't afford the prescriptions that the doctor had given them. So we give them £10 advance pay, go get your prescription. But by the way, I expect to see you back in a week. So it's a benevolent autocracy.
Great. Everyone likes a benevolent autocracy in your life. Back there.
My name's David Arnold from Unison. I had a similar question actually, or a related question. I'm from Brighton, and I'm interested in that question about different rates, because clearly the cost of living in Brighton is, not far away from cost of living in London. It costs a fortune to live down there. Things like rents and so on are very high. So, what consideration have you been given to different rates around the UK? And a follow-up, if I can, what opportunities are there for organisations like Unison to engage with this review? Thanks.
So let's take those two and then go back up another round of questions. Right, so first of all, so two questions for the first one and the second, which is on why we just got a London and a UK rate. What about loads of different rates all over the place? And then let's come specifically to childcare. How that's is clear. Do you want to just touch on?
Yes, so there's clearly a small number of areas in the UK with much higher costs, and obviously Brighton is one of those. Oxford, Cambridge definitely come up as this was mentioned as an issue. I think the overwhelming message that we got was that any further kind of fragmentation of the rates basically wouldn't really be all that helpful for the campaign. For getting the message across, people really like the simplicity of there being a single UK rate. There's always going to be, again, this is the whole point of there being no perfect calculation, we're always going to have to do some kind of average that covers a lot of those costs. But I think there's definitely a case for, within those areas, looking at what are the drivers, and I think it kind of goes into the broader campaign as well of living costs within those areas, what are the opportunities for lawyers like yourself to think about how else can I help that kind of world. So I think if going forward, if there were really big divergences in cost, you think you can see potentially that coming out more strongly in the research, and hopefully the recommendations that we've made around having a broader focus group from more kind of regionally diverse mix to get some of those extra costs in and help to reflect that a bit better.
Yeah, and just to say, obviously, the places in the country where you see the most active local living wage campaigns, it's not a coincidence, those are also the areas where the minimum wage and actually national wage have least bite, particularly obviously in Cambridge actually, but Brighton as well, and some other cities where you've got Edinburgh. But you see minimum wage not being as suitable as a level of standard living in that area, and you tend to then get more active campaigns. Now, how are we going to get some childcare to buy the sign up to this?
So, firstly, just to echo what Colin was saying about different rates, we totally understand about the Oxford and Brighton issue, but lessons we've learned from a campaign perspective from sister campaigns in the States are that fragmentation has not enabled the kind of success that we've seen. But it's we work closely with these local campaigns, and on your specific example of Nursery Coach, it's fantastic that you offer that occupational sick scheme. On nursery, we would love to see more nurseries with childcare. We would absolutely love it. We know that's one of the sectors where there's loads of low pay. One of the things that Colin alluded to, which I didn't mention in my opening remarks, is we are keen to look at some of these broader issues as we go forward. So obviously the hourly rate is absolutely central and core to everything that we do. But we are very aware that there are other issues going on, like what you were just talking about sick pay benefits, but also hours worked, access to skills and training and so on. And actually 2 weeks ago we launched a Good Jobs in Retail toolkit, which looked at some of those bigger issues about how you create good jobs that can pay the living wage in retail, which is of course where you see a lot of low pay. So we are very interested in looking at those kind of issues, and we would, in order to help these kind of sectors be able to pay the living wage.
Do you want to touch on the question about how should people that want to get engaged in what happens next?
Okay, so Unison, I think, were involved in the consultation for this review, which is fantastic. In terms of how people can get involved in what happens next, if you just drop the Living Wage Foundation a line, we can keep you posted. And we do work quite closely with the unions, particularly Unison, so we can kind of meet separately and discuss that.
Great. Okay, is there anyone else? Or should we get some questions?
No, I think the people who are working in, with the children, I suppose they may be earning a London wage because they're working in London and expecting a childcare rate which is perhaps based on a Brighton wage. And I just wonder whether there's a challenge there for the way that you set your fees. I know that we actually have some childcare facilities in our buildings, and we've insisted that they are paid living wage, and we've had to adjust the rental rates we have for those companies in order to enable that. So there's a sort of trying to make the system work.
Great. Right, let's get some more questions. There's a gentleman here, Natalie, and then would anyone who is not a male or white hospital, shall we know, run to the front?
Just some questions on accreditation. If a company signs up for the UK living wage, does that mean automatically they must also sign up for a London living wage if they've got premises in London?
Yeah.
And does it also include their suppliers? Do they also have to monitor their suppliers? And my follow-up question is, how do you measure compliance? You showed a very impressive chart of the number of companies joining. Have there been any examples of companies leaving either voluntarily or because they've been required to leave?
Great question. And lady?
Hi, I'm Katie O'Malley from Citizens Advice. I've got 3 questions, but they're all really short, so bear with me. And
That's what they always say.
No, they really are. One about methodology, quickly. It's reassuring that it seems to be really quite thorough. And I wondered if there was, if it's taken into account at all people's natural spending habits when you're thinking about the composition of the focus groups. We know some people consider a weekly trip to the cinema absolutely essential, for others it's a once-a-year treat, and I wondered if attitudinal factors are taken into account there. 2 quick questions on implementation. I thought, Stuart, it's really positive that you had a lot of people at the lower end of the pay scale who suddenly got a really big pay rise, but I was wondering, did you get, as an organisation, any backlash at all on those people who are earning perhaps just above and who perhaps feel like, just getting by, but they didn't get any pay rise at all? Thirdly, it sounds like there's a reasonable business case for having the living wage. Your chart showed increased productivity, less sickness, etc. When you're trying to sell this to companies, is there a genuine commercial business case for having this? Does it balance up okay in terms of the extra expenditure and what they're getting back from their employees?
What do you think the campaign is? No, there's no business case at all. It's busting companies up and down the country. Right, question.
Simon Black, Low Pay Commission. You mentioned universal credit. Have you done any modelling of what that would do to the value of the living wage? I guess what does that imply, or what view do you have on the relative balance and responsibilities between the market and the state?
Oh my God. Right, we've gone from the minute to these massive questions of the state. Right, okay, let's get into some of those. So do you want to deal with this accreditation question on suppliers and compliance?
Yeah. So accreditation, firstly, yes, absolutely, for national employers have to pay in London and the UK, hence the need for the alignment methodology. In terms of what the actual criteria is for suppliers, the key point which Stuart alluded to is you obviously have to pay your directly staff the living wage, but you have to pay your contractors who work for 2 hours or more for 8 weeks consecutively on site. So that's the kind of definition. So that covers your cleaning, your security, your catering, that kind of stuff. And that's the kind of model that we work by, and that's where we've really been able to see these benefits in cleaners, caterers, and so on. In terms of compliance, a couple of ways really. Firstly, when we accredit, all of the employees have to send communications to all of their staff to tell them that they're becoming living wage and explain what that means. We have a whistleblowing website, so employees can come through and say anonymously if they think they're not getting living wage, which we monitor closely. We haven't seen, we have a very low dropout rate, very low. It was something like 95% retention. And some of that is natural turnover of small businesses, because interestingly, actually about 65% of accredited employees are small businesses, which people perhaps might seem counterintuitive because they're family-run businesses and they want to kind of do the right thing by their workers. And so we're not seeing a drop-off of employers. which we're very pleased to see. I mean, that's probably because the type of employees we're recruiting are the ones who have chosen to do this in the first place. But obviously it's something we monitor really closely.
Great. Business case.
Yeah. There was a point about hierarchy, but I mean, there's both the wage hierarchy for people at the same level, but also the management hierarchy, and absolutely, if you're working in cleaning or security in particular, the chances are that a supervisor is paid less than the new living wage. So you do have to look at the hierarchy, and we did raise, in fact, I think that the cost in the first place associated with raising the hierarchy was higher than implementing living wage for those on minimum wage. So. But in any company, certainly large companies, I know there are, if you're in a small company with one employee, it must be very hard. But in a large company, you are going to have a lot of people who are at the same level, who actually, because they joined at different times, have a slightly different wage. It doesn't tend to be a lot of knowledge in individuals, but there is going to be some disparity. But I think that probably just like that. We did manage the hierarchy between different levels, and we do make sure that we apply a percentage to everyone at the lowest level. In terms of the business case, I think that this has to be looked at over a period of time. So on implementation, we absolutely had to pay into our suppliers in particular, and to a certain extent our internal wage bill, additional funding in order to manage the uplift from minimum wage. I mean, it makes, obviously, the maths do the maths. It's an increase in wage bill, and therefore it's an increase in cost. What we're taking a 2 or 3 year view, though, working with suppliers now are some suppliers are very keen to understand how living wage works, and when we re-tendered our cleaning and security contracts, actually the total cost of those contracts was lower post-implementation of living wage than it was before, because we looked at doing things in a different way. We have very little nighttime cleaning now, so that sort of unseen night crew of people, which I personally don't approve of. We have no 0 hours contracts allowed in our supply base. We had one supplier who actually refused to pay living wage to its staff because of the issues they had in the same city, different customers, and that contract was ended, and we actually back paid the people who worked in our company what they lost in terms of living wage from when we started the contract to when we renewed the contract. So I think we have seen, and sharing this with our suppliers, working in partnership with our suppliers, we have seen a reduction in costs. Just one simple example, in all of our supply base, people wear a uniform, and every time that a person leaves, the uniform has to be rebought. And just the cost of that has gone down because the turnover has reduced, and we're not rebuying uniforms.
It's worth saying, there's a wider thing in low-paid sectors in Britain, retail is a big example of very staggeringly high turnover rates. There's different between firms. Some firms have very, very high, like half the workforce in a year. That is an incredibly expensive business model to operate. And so there are definitely changes in culture going on at the moment, which is a good thing. About whether people think it's worth paying for that. To have the level of control and flexibility management has traditionally wanted, they're paying this very high price in terms of turnover, motivation, and that is definitely, the mood is definitely, you can feel it talking to some of these companies, it's definitely switching that, whether that was a price worth paying, particularly when they're going to have to pay a higher national wage anyway. They're having to rethink about these trade-offs and whatnot. Now, on the role of the state and the future of it, and universal credit rather than Simon's question, do you want to do the philosophy first?
Sure. Well, I'll do it the other way around, actually. So
Surely not.
So the impacts of UC depends on what Living Wage Commission takes forward. Because some of the decisions that we make, or the recommendations that we've made, have been around the size of families in it, the number of families, so that will affect it. But roughly speaking, across the next few years, again over 5 years, we'd expect to maybe add on about 50p roughly. So these are big caveat to that, roughly in that sort of territory, and that is across a number of years. So it's not a total radical rewriting of the relationship between employers and the state. But I think
You're looking at the same thing on living wage and on real living wage.
So I think if we did see a radical shift, so if the government were silly enough to just get rid of tax credits or get rid of housing benefit or something like that, then I think that's why it's excellent that the Living Wage Commission are now in place to think about some of these big, difficult questions that I'm not going to be able to answer perfectly. To think, where does the balance lie, and where's the role of the employer end, and where should the state kind of pick up some of that responsibility? So I think that answers the question. On the spending habits question Katie had, so in the MIS groups, it is meant to be kind of a mix of people from different backgrounds, different income levels, to get a sense of, so it's not just a very similar group of people saying this is what we do. It's meant to be kind of a discussion, and it's meant to be, it's a social consensus, so there is a bit of, arguing over what should be included and what shouldn't. So it's, intended to reflect that as much as possible, that people with different views are agreeing on this basket.
So just to follow up on your point there, one of the premises underpinning this review is that the current starting point for the living wage, which is that we are kind of taking as a given the current balance between state and employer, is being maintained. So we're saying we think that is maintainable over the next few years. That's why it doesn't come out very strongly, but that is what's going on insofar as there's a view being taken underneath the kind of the workings you'll see there. That is all dependent on states not doing bonkers things. That applies to many things in life. Right, let's get some more questions. There's a question right here at the front.
Yeah.
And Charmaine's lady in the middle on the right.
I'm going to take, it's Paul Nicholson, Taxpayers Against Poverty. I'm going to hazard the thought that there should be a principle underpinning all policy and research related to the living wage. But the principle I'm going to suggest will require one government or another to get its head round a policy for affordable housing. And the principle should be that the income left after rent has been paid, council tax has been paid, and income tax has been paid, is enough to buy a healthy diet, to cook it, to keep warm, to buy clothes, to buy transport, and other necessities which exist. And that principle should really, and the same principle modified to deal with the moral hazard of paying too much money to people who are unemployed, should apply to the unemployed. At the moment, we've got situations where hungry, stressed, and whose well-being has deteriorated for the last, since 2010, is absolutely no good to employers. The unemployed are really in trouble, and absolutely no good to the economy at large. So I think the principle should be extended and underpinning everything.
Brilliant question. Question in the middle?
Hi, from Universities and Colleges Employers Association. First question to Stuart. It's just follow on question on the effect of the living wage and the grades above. You've mentioned that you've addressed some by increasing pay, and you've addressed it in the way job has been designed, like reducing the use of nighttime cleaners, and you've also mentioned other cost controls like reducing turnover, absenteeism, and not having to buy new uniforms. So that's all great. So what do you think is the main thing in terms of controlling the effects of of living wage and grades above? How do you address that? What would you think are the main factors that helps to the people above the living wage? Secondly, just to follow on Simon's question on the living wage, and I understand there's a lot of caveats on the calculations, and obviously everything depends on what the government policy is and what the Living Wage Commission accepts. And you've indicated that the London living wage is likely to increase a lot more based on the new methodology. What do you think, in simple terms then, for the proposed calculations, assuming everything's the same, would the living wage in the new calculation go up faster than the current calculation?
And then there's a lady just here, straight in the middle on the left.
Andrea Werner, Middlesex University. I have a question for Conor. Now, when the national living wage was announced last year, they were providing kind of trajectory looking forward to 2020, and that the national living wage would reach £9.20. Do you think that the real living wage could come up with a similar trajectory, just to make it a little bit more predictable, especially for employers?
Right, okay, well, let's do that one first, because that is a very concrete question.
So, shockingly, employers did say, can we have a trajectory on this, and can I know exactly what it's going to be for the next few years, so I can make my nice business plan, we'll know exactly what the costs are going to be. So, it would be nice, but I think the principles that we've had, and again, the aim aim is to have something that's really linked to cost of living and how it changes every year. It just means that's not really possible. But if you do want to have, we could set out something, if you want to have it really reflecting what's going on in inflation, but also in government policy, cost of specific items like housing and childcare, it's probably not that useful, and then employers will just get upset when it's a totally different figure. So I think it's more about kind of unpredictability in general. And I think in terms of the other question on linked into how the trajectory is likely to be in the future, it is really, really hard to say. I don't think I can give an adequate answer to it, to be honest, because it will. I mean, there's some things where there's things where we can see the volatility might be reduced. So I think what's really valuable in this is that, again, the Living Wage Commission is in place. So if there are really big changes in policy, it's not going to, I think a recommendation we've made would be that it wouldn't just all come in overnight. So that would be kind of slowly factored in to represent how, if something changed massively in what people think is required to meet that minimum standard of living, instead of just putting that in instantly, I think to reflect how social norms change slowly over time, I think it's kind of sensible for the Living Wage Commission to think about how that gets brought in. So I think there's lots of mechanisms, but I think in terms of the overall picture, it's really hard to say.
Do you want to Paul's principled case?
Absolutely. I think just to say that those principles are absolutely the fundamental principles of the whole campaign. So going back to the quote from Father Ryan, that is fundamentally what this is about. So the whole basket of goods and services that Connor's talking about is exactly what you just said: healthy diet, heating, keeping warm, transport. All those things are absolutely core. They end up in the whole thing, and we would never lose sight of that. That's kind of the fundamentals of this campaign. You're absolutely right. There's some trust research out a while ago now that talked about 2/3 of people going to food banks for work. So there really is a need for this work, and that's exactly what this method review is trying to do, shore that up. But that is the absolute underpinning principle.
The other thing, Paul, that you're getting at is as I said, there's this thing about the role of the state and what it does and how technical that is. Actually, housing is the other large area where, particularly in London, but not just in London, if you carried on seeing people that all the calculations of these people are basically either in the private rented sector or the social rented sector. There aren't home owners in the calculation for the living wage, it's obviously low paid people. And if you continue to see very large rises in private rents feed into that calculation, because we don't build enough houses, which as a shock as a country we don't do, then in the end, either housing benefit bills have to rise to pay that, the state has to pick up the tab, or at some stage, concepts like the living wage are going to struggle. There's not like, this is the real world. At some point, the state or the employer's doing it. At some point, the employer says, no, don't live in very long that you can afford. So that is a key. But in the end, that's part of a broader problem, which is if you don't build enough houses, it turns out it's a problem.
Mainly with renters, because they don't have the increasing value of their property to fall back on.
Exactly.
As do landlords and homeowners, and they are in really dreadful difficulty in London.
They are. There's an excellent graphs on that. Connor restrained himself by not, but I promise you there are some graphs in the report. Right, do you want to touch on this issue about how far the organisation where would I have to be on the organisation's pay scale to get some benefit from the living wage? Did I get shifted up if I was on the median?
Right.
In the organisation?
I'm not an accountant, but I will just say that depends. I think we have an opportunity to do some quite deep reviews of this. If I can just take a cleaning team as an example, I think historically a cleaning team would have been on minimum wage. The supervisor of a team of 3 might be on 10p or so an hour more than minimum wage. And by raising everybody to living wage, somehow that workforce becomes much more engaged, and the teams tend to stay together for longer. And so what we found is that instead of having a sort of slightly more highly paid supervisor, a team of 3, you can have a slightly more highly paid supervisor, say a team of 6, because not only is that supervisor being paid more and therefore perhaps is more capable, more responsible, more committed, but actually people working in the team themselves are being paid more, and those things apply to them. So the whole thing lifts up. So you can immediately see that, obviously in the economics of that, you might be paying more than a supervisor of a smaller team. But the hierarchy is really dependent on the service that's being offered. And I know that we have had to lift up, even down to location supervisors, supervisors a certain amount on an hourly basis in order to make sure there is a hierarchy. What I will say is one difference between, as the Living Wage Foundation, hugely supportive of the Chancellor's Living Wage. Anything that improves pay has to be positive. What are the differences between implementation of that and implementation of the Foundation's Living Wage is the assistance given to companies. And we are very happy to engage as part of the accreditation process to say, can we bring in experts, I use that word, wider sense, can we bring in people from other organisations who've had a similar experience and help with that implementation, rather than it just being it's this day, it's this rate, and please see how you can make it work. So it's different, I think, for each type of company, for each type of function in that company. But what the Foundation would do is bring in people with similar issues, similar sized companies, say how have they made it work in order to support accreditation.
It's a very un-British thing to do, but there is a thing called job design. Yeah. And the fact that we've kind of stopped doing it for 30 years, probably, that's what this in the end comes down to, is are you at all interested in thinking about the jobs you provide, how those fit in, what the pay rates are, and basically slightly stop doing that, and we are going to have to rediscover it. Right.
Just to add to that,
yeah.
because the piece of work that I mentioned earlier about the toolkit retail is exactly that. It's if you have what we find from the employers we work with, as Stuart just described, is it works best for the business case, the commercial business case, when they introduce it as a whole change management process in their organisation. So they really look at how the jobs are designed, they multi-skill so that people can take on different responsibilities. Those workers therefore have a progression trajectory, so it's a much more holistic win-win situation, both for the business and for the workers. We're very keen to look at that, and there's some examples of that amongst our retailers, so IKEA and Brewdog are two examples that spring to mind. Brewdog are a craft beer company based in Scotland, and do look at that report for that. But exactly as you said, it's about job design, it's about taking that whole holistic approach to introducing high pay.
Great, let's get one more set of questions, and then let everyone release you to the morning. So the question right behind you. And there's a gentleman just on the left.
Thank you. Picking up on those points, Julia Haynat, London Borough of Lambeth. Could you say something about the changes we've seen in the contractual nature, so that some people may be being paid a living wage, but their contract is relatively insecure, so they may be on payroll to be paid, but they're not an employee. And they may, and a lot of contracts can have different variations around that. But for example, the gentleman here talks about maybe not having entitlement to sick pay or pensions. And also love to hear your position on apprenticeships and work experience, which is really important in terms of, we know, for many outcomes, and the moves nationally towards employer and education engagement. And is this very much on your radar?
Great, okay.
Hi, my name's Mike Roberts. I'm a senior local government member. From the opposition, we managed to get our majority group, which is from the blue corner, paying all the staff of the local council the Living Wage Foundation pay a few years ago, which is very positive. As you know, local government is very much under the cosh with regard to reductions in staff. You've only got to look at Leeds Council, now it's in probably 2,000 reduction, and also cuts as well. We've got a couple of big contracts coming up, which we're looking at the moment, one in waste and one in leisure. And the contractors may or may not be living wage payers. I was just wondering, from the views that you have there on the table, whether and what advice you would give with regard to what we should be looking for in relationship to those two contracts, in relationship to the people who are going to be applying. I would like to see the Living Wage Foundation, but I'm sure that the people who run the council will be looking for the benefit in relationship to the council's own financial position.
Okay, let's get one more question. We've got something different. Maybe we'll take one more. Let's take two more quickly. One right at the front. And then shall we have the gentleman just there?
Have you, since the government has introduced the national living wage, have you felt an impact on the number of people or businesses volunteering to pay the UK living wage? Because I can imagine once upon a time that saying, oh, we pay the living wage versus the minimum wage would have been a selling point for employers. But now, obviously, since it's been usurped, how does that impact you? Can I just ask a second question?
Everyone's asked it today.
Yeah. Oh no, I've forgotten it now, sorry.
That's excellent memory.
Michael McGilligan from NICFA, the body that represents the third sector in Northern Ireland. My question is basically about the calculation of that basket and looking at the diverging policies in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland. Free prescriptions, free university fees in Scotland, free domiciliary care in Northern Ireland, a mitigation packet for universal credit coming to Northern Ireland. In terms of if those policies keep diverging and the state retracts in England but maintains its position in the rest of the UK or even goes further, will we need separate living wages?
Great, okay, that is a very good question. So do you want to start? Let's start on Julia's got a big question about what's going on in the labour market. Yes, there's rates of pay, but there's also rising security contractual changes. Do you want to get on that comment?
Sure. So I mean, we've done work on 0 hours contracts in the past and looked at how widespread insecurity is. And I think what we found is that it hasn't really gotten massively worse over the past 10 or 20 years. But for a group of people, they really do have that kind of depth of insecurity, which is really difficult to deal with. And it was again something that came up, especially talking to campaigners, as I mentioned earlier on, that the living wage rate is really important and it's great for the role that it plays, but you always need to think about these broader campaigns and thinking about how do we make sure that people are getting enough hours and that they're actually meeting the stuff that they can actually get a chance to meet that salary in the first place. So I think it probably goes beyond what we've looked at in this, but there's definitely, especially as the national living wage gets brought in, and there's stories about employers choosing to take that approach of offering fewer hours, which is something that looks minor overall across the entire workforce, but from surveys that we've done recently, I think there is, within certain sectors that can be a bigger effect and kind of have an impact on those who are impacted. So I think it's definitely something to bear in mind.
If you look at what's happened to the labour market since the recession, there have been 2 big spikes in self-employment. One during the recession, so the levels increase, and actually over the last year, a surprising volume of this rise. Not like overall employment rise, lots of which is about full-time jobs, so we should be careful about being like every job has been created rubbish. But over the last year, you have seen a large increase in self-employment again. Some part-time as well, but again, I think we should be careful about. There are lots of good jobs being created as well, but there's definitely a self-employment problem. Okay, well, is there anyone around?
Only just to reiterate today that we are really mindful of that, and it's something that we want to look at. The living wage is critical, but we do recognise that it's one part of the picture of what affects low-paid workers. In terms of kind of your specifics around apprenticeships and so on, it's not technically part of the criteria, but we do set out what best practice looks like, and when we talk to living wage employers or employers who want to go accredited, we do discuss a number of issues with them, and we look into these issues to make sure that it's fitting the fairness test. So we do very much look at that. Is there anything else you want to
Mike would like some advice on his contracting for his waste and leisure contracts, and he can invoice him later if you have any particularly good advice to offer.
We at the foundation, we can talk you through some of that. We can talk you through how to approach that. It might be interesting also to get stewards for you, because I expect you to negotiate that from kind of the ground. But we definitely work with you on that. We also have something called a recognised service provider scheme, which is a kind of halfway house to accreditation. This is recognising that in those kind of industries, it's highly competitive. We wanted to try and make inroads and raise awareness of the importance of the living wage. So we have a scheme where you can become recognised as a service provider if you pay all your directly employed staff a living wage, and you commit to always putting forward a living wage tender or option. So the idea connects some of those accredited service providers with some of the local authorities that we have accredited to make sure that obviously to remain accredited their suppliers are compliant, but we can discuss that separately.
And you could obviously, as a halfway house, you could obviously encourage your council to insist that anybody tendering for these services provides both a non-living wage tender price and a living wage tender price, and then at which point I think what you euphemistically call the blue corner, will have to decide which of these 2 tenders how much they're prepared to pay to save, to not pay the living wage, it will at least be visible then. Your invoice is coming in post. Right, is there anything you want to add on that?
Only to say that you might have to change the specification, and that really is where you can get a good supplier prepared to give you what they might call a non-compliant bin. It's a simple example is in a lot of offices, everyone has a bin next to their desk. It's much cheaper if you have a bin in the centre of the office that people have to walk to. And just by changing to what we call binless office is a way of reducing the amount of time it takes to do waste collection, and that reduces the amount of the cost, and therefore you can pay either the right person a little bit more or fewer people. But you need to work with the supply base to say what ideas are others using, and you get what to the customer is a pretty similar service, but actually to you is a lower cost.
Very good. Kevin, do you want to touch on this, because you did mention earlier the change in accreditation since July last year?
Oh yeah, so we haven't, obviously there is an element of brand confusion, we know that, and we're looking into that. We're talking very closely with our accredited employers about the impacts of that. But as the kind of chart showed, we actually saw a spike in accreditations when the national living wage was announced, because in a sense it also provides employers, now that the statutory bar has been raised, employers, some of them are having to look at how to increase their pay anyway, so it's kind of opening a chink, and we can say to them, well, if you're going to do that, why don't we go further and provide a pay that actually means that your staff have a decent quality of living. We've done well than that. And secondly, there's employers out there who want to show that they are going beyond the legal minimum, and so they still want to join up to our scheme. So we've actually seen an increase in interest. Obviously, it's something we're closely monitoring, but that's the experience we've received today.
Great. Conor, do you want to touch on this calculation basket and what happens if devolved policies diverge a lot in future?
Sure. So the current landscape and the recommendation we've made should be kind of factored into the basket basically, but because the differences in policy aren't so different in general, it doesn't really at the moment have a strong case for a completely different rate. And what we've recommended over time that the Living Wage Commission should keep an eye on. So if there is a new completely different policy settlements in other places, in other parts of the UK, then that should definitely be it's an issue for reflection. But I think in general, as Catherine already mentioned, the strength of the campaign really is in that single rate, because costs don't vary that much across the UK overall. Some things are a bit more expensive here, others are cheaper there. But I think going forward, having that single rate really does make sense. But if things do again radically shift, then this is definitely something you should reflect upon at that point.
Great. Well, thank you all for coming, particularly on a drizzly day. Some people may have not braved it, but you all did. So whether or not you pay the living wage, you still get thanks. Thank you to the panel, thank you to Catherine for running the campaign and for commissioning us and the work. Thank you to Stuart for paying the rate and for taking the time this morning. And thank you to Conor for writing the report that you're all going to go away and read. Good. And particularly thank you to all for being so creative. And not normally can they manage an average of 3 questions each. So you're all a winner in some way today. So have a good day and enjoy the rain.